But what's the practicality of it? Should organizations have like a customer experience officer, or sh- because otherwise CMO, CTO, or COO would all maximize locally, but nobody will
Yeah.
maximize, for the global impact.
Yeah, really good point. Maybe if I can cheat your question slightly by saying, like, who owns the customer in a company? And when you start asking that question, it doesn't make sense for a CTO or a CIO to own the customer. That's like not a smart answer right to that question, because marketing already owning the customer, but maybe they don't own the full estate. And that's like, if you
Hmm.
want to be customer centric, much overused term, then I think you've got to bring together that ownership of customer under marketing. Marketing is the one part of the company that's responsible for growth of customer value, right? So that's why it needs to be attached to the customer. That's not to say that customer services, customer care, those things aren't important, but the orientation I think needs to be more around marketing, because no one else cares so much about the customer as kind of marketing does, because it's a outwardly facing capability. A lot of technical services are more inward facing. They tend to be cost centers. So, and what happens with cost centers? Well, everyone wants to cut costs and optimize it. Marketing team's about growth. It's about, well, we need growth, so we're not going to just manage the costs on marketing. We're going to spend where it's appropriate to do so that we think it's going to drive growth. So I think that's a straightforward decision. And the challenge is, I guess, for a CMO is most chief marketing officers come from a advertising or media background. 90% of the money, in historically, 90% of the money that a CMO spent was on media spend. So people who are comfortable doing that are far more likely to be CMOs. But
Hmm.
now, like, I can't remember what the latest Gartner figures are, but I think it's roughly, CMOs spend equally on technology and on media. And therefore it takes a different class maybe of CMO to thrive in that kind of environment where they're spending so much money on technology. They've got to understand the technology and understand the value of it. They've got to have the soft skills. So, in our history of working together, you know, where did we have our biggest success? Where clients had made huge investments in Adobe or Salesforce, but they didn't have the skills internally, and then they look for a consultant like us to help to give them the short term capability, but as they build their
Right.
own capability. But it's tough. It's a tough process. The biggest kind of bottleneck in companies being good with martech today is people with the soft skills to use the tools. Right, that's still a challenge because the tools themselves are always progressing, always getting more complex, always new
Right.
releases, always condensed into a cloud. Now you have to have 20 different tools coming together. So that's a huge challenge for brands. Is like, how do I develop the soft skills? Not in my headquarters office, but all around the world, because all around the world we're doing this kind of stuff. And for a global brand, that's a huge challenge.
Yeah, no, makes sense. But then, I mean, like, typically they say that don't talk about, you know, your product services when you market, probably talk about what problem you can solve for the customers. And likewise, with the whole digitization, now brands are also talking about, let's say, they have a new app or they have a new platform or they are on metaverse or they're doing a particular, gamification. And then they're also telling about, how it can help. But then, because now everybody is walked on or hooked on to the whole innovation, everybody is looking for that next big thing. Would the CMO still look after that? Because CMO would have a certain influence of circle of influence, then how far then
Yeah,
can go, because you have to own the customer end to end.
yeah,
And in most cases, most businesses, I mean, which have higher customer lifetime value, acquisition, yes, is very important, but then it's also how you engage. I mean, especially if you look at travel and hospitality, it's when the user, the whole experience of staying, let's say, in a hotel for for holidays, and then what happens beyond that, that whole experience, would then the CMO still have that influence on, how do we call the shots in terms
yeah.
of.
It depends on the company. It depends on the industry. Like in consumer goods companies, CMO is a very senior position, very powerful. If you look at Unilever,
Right.
P&G, Nestle, they're marketing run businesses. Marketing is very important. If you look at a bank, marketing is a much smaller expense area, and maybe the CIO is far more influential in the bank because they're taking care of core banking systems and making sure payments go through and important stuff like that. So I think it depends on your orientation of what industry you're in. And obviously there are bits where the product itself, whether your product is a hard product or a soft product, airlines, hotels, as you say, that gets even more complicated. But to me, that's the future is that the CMO owns the end-to-end experience, which means that marketing needs to evolve. It can't just be about comms, media. It needs to be about experience. And I think what we've seen over the last 20 years is CX has grown from being this kind of techie digital thing to now being like almost an equal partner in marketing alongside, advertising, media, and now CX is like the third wheel, if you like, the third leg of the stool.